Welcome to another session. I hope you were well. I'd like to speak today about a topic that I started this week. In the session I did previously, I made reference to an example of something that is becoming more of an occurrence in the United Kingdom, but particularly in the West. This occurrence, generally speaking, applies to women who get to about 35 years and above, but particularly women who are 40 years and above, or who have just turned 40. The occurrence is a simple one. Women generally get to a point in time in their lives and they decide that perhaps love and a successful, significant, meaningful relationship is off the cards, and they will spend the rest of their lives alone, and therefore these women choose either to go and get pets, usually dogs, which is an indication that there is an emotional void that needs to be filled, that there is love in them that wants to be shared, and there is something in them that wants to receive love. What has become more of an occurrence, however, is women who decide to go to a sperm bank and start a family as single mothers. I call them baby mamas. I talk about different types of baby mamas and single mothers, but today's session is a different twist on the conversation. I have been perplexed. Fundamentally at my core, I wish everybody health, happiness, success, prosperity, good health, and good well-being. Relationships are at the core of our fulfillment and happiness. But I have been stuck and perplexed at how someone can go through life, get to 40 years, that's half of your lived life, based on the general life expectancy of women in the UK. How could you have lived half your entire life and not found someone compatible to be with? There are roughly 58 million people in the UK. Roughly 20, give or take 20, maybe 26, 27 million of those are men. If we assume that a third of those are of marriageable age, you're looking at roughly another close to 10 million men. Now, how is it possible in a country that is an island, you have 10 million men of marriageable age, and you cannot find one of those men to pair bond with, to enjoy life with, to live the rest of your life, knowing that someone is chronically in your life and you are chronically in someone else's life? I think at the core of that failure, which is what we should call this, is the lack of understanding of how intersexual dynamics works, and knowing how to price yourself properly, and knowing your value, and knowing when to recognize that a fair exchange is on the card, it's on the table. Now, we understand this with buildings. You have a buyer, you have a seller. A transaction only takes place when a willing buyer and a willing seller believe that there is something similar to what is a fair exchange. Whenever there is a discrepancy between what is being asked, the price, and the value received, a transaction seldom takes place. Most of the time, women are staying unmarried, wasting their prime days because they have overpriced themselves relative to the value that they bring to the man or the relationship. And so, in today's session, I am going to go through some things, or a few things that I think are necessary. I'll talk about 10 items. And at the core, I'm trying to answer a question. How can you determine your value and price? Price is what you pay, value is what you get. From a man's perspective, a man assesses a woman based on her value in the marketplace, not necessarily to him as an individual. We first have to see you and we're relatively comparing you to other people in the same way that a woman compares a man to the next man. The question, therefore, is for women. There is a confusion where women do not understand that their prices are too high, sometimes even too low. They believe they're offering much more than what they're asking for. And from 30 to 40, the prime years that a woman has to make very quick decisions, because post 40, the options that she might have start to dwindle. A very simple way, and I start with number one, a very simple way to understand your value is to simply pick up a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and try to understand. Put pen to paper. The question is a simple one. What is the quantity of men that have approached you? And these men have to be men of value, considered by other men to be valuable, that have approached you in seeking your hand in marriage, approached you for marriage, or have made a proposal to you for marriage. Look at the caliber of such men, the quantity and the caliber of such men who have come to you specifically with the intent to marry you, or have come to you proposing a relationship with the specific intent for marriage. Make a list of that number. Now here's a caveat. The age 35 has to be the minimum age. We start making considerations from about 30, about 35 and over only. I don't care much about men who are 20, 22, 23, 29, even 30. I don't even consider men who are 30 to 35. The man has to be 35 years and over. Now, I'm speaking to those in the West. Part of the reason for that restriction is because it takes a long time for men to come into their manhood and maturity. 18 to 30, we're usually focused on our career. We're focused on understanding who we are as men, finding our purpose, but learning as an apprentice under someone's teachings. We get to a point of security, but we haven't actually allowed ourselves to fail. 30 to 35 is usually the period where a man has accumulated enough security, both in skills and knowledge and understanding and experience, and therefore has some security that enables him to either start a business, pursue that purpose or dream he has, and allows himself a good quantity of time, 5 years, to fail, to learn, to try things. 35 is when we come into, generally speaking, most men start to find that the part of them that thinks critically and can think from a problem-solving perspective starts to come alive. Generally speaking, men are expected to be able to play 4 Ps: provision, protection, the priestly role, and professing his love through his presence. In this day and age, it's easy to be able to provide, and indirectly you can protect, because if you can afford to buy a house or live in a place that is safe, you're indirectly providing protection by virtue of the city, the state, the town, the local village, local community you're part of. But the priestly duties is where most men fail, because we have no lived experience. We've been learning under the guidance of someone else prior to 30, and we haven't failed. And so we have no scars. We have no way of actually being the one who teaches the vision. We don't actually understand the word. So we can't actually share the word with the children. We can't teach the lady. Not that she's actually supposed to be a student, but someone who's supposed to be part of the vision. The priestly duties is why men, generally speaking, need to be at least 35 to understand life and to be able to communicate and to be the leader the woman needs him to be. That's the first. The first is woman, pick a piece of paper and inventory the quantity and caliber of men of value, whom other men value. There's a key distinction. I'm not asking you to choose men based on your personal choices and preferences and characteristics and character. The man has to be chosen. Men, we fall into a hierarchy amongst men. We choose our leaders. So this has to be men that other men consider to be valuable and of value. That's the first. Now the second is, again, a piece of paper. If you do not have one already, get a piece of paper and make a list of what I call your checklist. Most women have a checklist. Last week, I did a session where this is fascinating, Steve Harvey and Oprah Winfrey on their shows had women on the shows, and these women were talking about their lists. And some of these women had lists that ran into 40, 50, 60 items. Whatever your list might be, that is your list. Make a note of all of the items that are, you might call deal breakers. It could be the man's height, his income, whether he has a six-pack, 6-inch. It could be things like 6-figure bank account. You decide. It could be his temperament, his attributes, physical and character. Make a list of everything you want. These are deal breakers. I'm not saying you might want nice to haves, and you can include those, but I'm talking about deal breakers. Your list of expectations. Take a list. Let me pause. Take a look at your list of expectations, and the longer that list is, the higher the price you are asking for. So when women say, I can't find the man, well, the reason is because your ask is too high. So we talked about number one, what men of value, what are the caliber of men of value who are pursuing you specifically with the intention for marriage, not for sex. Men will chase anything in a skirt. Women make a mistake by believing that a man that pursues her and has an interest in her shares that interest both sexually and relationally. When we meet women, generally speaking, we put women into two categories: wives and fun girls. Wives and others. That decision is made in a split second sometimes. The key distinction is, are you placed in the wife category? Because men who are looking for wives will also seek for sex. Now, that's number one. Number two is your checklist. I'm going to move into something that could be a little bit more sensitive, but please take this as it comes. Do not feel criticized by what I am about to share as I go forward. I talk about something called A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it goes on to Z of self-image. Your self-image determines the quality of men that you can attract. But more importantly, your image determines the quality of men that you can retain. Appearance and your attitude is A. Your beauty and your behavior is B. Your communication and your candor is C. Your discipline, and in this day and age where we have so much social media present, your digital avatar, what you share publicly about yourself as a woman, is D. E is your emotional intelligence, your empathy, and your experience. Now, experience specifically has nothing to do with how hard you have worked, how well you've studied. When men talk about experience, we're speaking specifically based on your body count, physically, your emotional count, emotionally, and your spiritual bonding. In other words, how many men have you been with intimately? Because the more men you've been with from a position of pair bonding, the lower the likelihood that you could pair bond with the man who is interested in you. As a matter of fact, for people who have a body count of 10 or higher, it starts to become an issue. I provide a formula. I simply say the age of consent in the UK is 18. If you started having sex before 18, there's a very high likelihood that you might have a very high body count, and therefore the possibility of pair bonding increases. Now, there are exceptions, but women are having sex at 13 and 14, which means by 18, they have body counts that are sometimes in the double digits before the age of consent. So by age 30, they are in the triple digits, which means the possibility of pair bonding is much less, and the possibility of divorce when there is a union is much higher. Take your age, subtract your age from the age of consent. That is the high limit. Take that number, divide by 2. That is the low limit. So for example, if you have just turned 18, technically speaking, all things remaining equal, 18 minus 18 is 0. This simply means if you have just turned 18, there should be no reason why you should have a high body count. But if you've turned 19, 19 minus 18 is 1. 1 becomes the high limit. If you divide a number by 2, it becomes a low number. So you're saying 0.5 up until 1, which will make sense because it would mean, remember, if you are in a relationship, then technically speaking, that's like saying you are half because you are still in the relationship. The moment you exit the relationship, that number becomes a 1. So if you're 19 and you started dating from 18, by the time you turn 19, you've only been dating for 1 year and you're still with that one person. So your body count should be between 0.5 and 1. If you're 28, 28 less 18 is 10. The maximum should be 10. The minimum should be 10 divided by 2, 5. And what this would simply mean is that between 18 years and 28, you have dated no more than 1 new person every single year. Ideally, 1 person every 2 years. This should make sense. Now, let me go back to the ABCD. F is your fitness and your femininity and your friendliness. G is your grace, your gratitude. I, inspiration. J, joy, how jovial you are. The list goes on. The key part of this is a simple one. Number 3, study your ABCD of self-image, because that determines the quality and caliber of men that you can attract, but more importantly, the quality and caliber of men of value that you can retain. I'm now moving to what I will consider to be a lot more sensitive matters, but deserving of talking about nonetheless. Women talk about not understanding what men want and how men judge and choose women. Everything is hidden and can be seen and can be determined by yourself. I have given you 3 so far. I would hope that if you sat down with a piece of paper and a pen, you could have gone through the first, the second, and the third to understand roughly your value. Now, if you will, and if you forgive me, let me just run through those 3 items again from the perspective of keeping you on track as to how you can assess the price you're asking for and your value. If the number is 0 for number 1, in other words, you had 0 men of value approach you with a specific intention for marriage, and in this particular instance, let me assume you were 25 and you've had 0 men who are 35 years and above, that is a problem. If you're 30 and you've had 0, that is a big problem. If you're 35 and you've had 0, that is a big problem. Number 2, your list. Generally speaking, if your list exceeds 10 items or a dozen items, you automatically position yourself as having a very high price. More importantly, you actually position yourself as being, from a man's perspective, too demanding, asking for too much and therefore of a lower value. In other words, the cost of having you is too high. Number 3, A, B, C, D of your self-image. Just go through your appearance, how do you dress, your attitude, and give yourself a ranking. Now this brings me to the physical part, which a woman can do very, very easily herself. Men judge women purely based, primarily, I should rephrase that statement, primarily, firstly and primarily based on what we see. And then when we get to know you, we make adjustments. Men who are looking to be married, men or value, who are looking for relationships, judge women purely, firstly, based on the visual. And then we add to that other desires that we may have. The desire to have a family, in other words, are you a wife? The desire for you to give us kids, in other words, can you reproduce for us? And actually your person, how personable you are, whether we can coexist peacefully with you. Now let me start by saying as follows. Take a look at your looks. That's the number 4. I'm going to start number 4 with your looks. People believe, for whatever reason, that they are more attractive than they really are. I have nothing to say to that. You get to choose. But in looking at your looks, we use a standard which simply says, you wake up first thing in the morning. In the morning, you're not wearing makeup. You've just woken up from sleep. Perhaps you've actually just had a shower or had a bath. Fresh face. You're still as new as you can be in your natural state. The judgment of your looks begins based on your looks specifically. How you look. Fresh face, first thing in the morning, assuming you just had a shower and you have not yet started to use any form of makeup or padding, or you've not started to augment your beauty. You, the woman, give yourself a ranking or a score from 0 until 10, recognizing that 5 is average. Give yourself a score. Now, the key thing, this is where there's a huge discrepancy. Women who judge themselves tend to judge themselves way above how men would judge women. My observation is women generally give themselves a score 2 points or more greater than what men will give them. So a woman who says I'm an 8 will score about a 5 from a man's perspective, because women judge themselves too idealistically rather than realistically. In any case, what matters is the humility to understand where you rank. There's something called the normal distribution. In a normal distribution, you have what's called the median or an average. Most people are average. Very few are exceptional. Very few fall into the 8s and 9s and 10s category. And a large number than the 8s, 9s and 10s will fall into the lower category. So what you tend to find is if you lump out what we call the extremes, the tails of the distribution, on the left and on the right, you have what we call a normal distribution, where people normally reside. You'll find most people are average. Number 4, your weight. Your weight plays a huge role. So here is a formula, my formula. This is an original from myself. But how do you know whether you are below average, average, or above average in your weight? Now, if you were to give yourself a score of a 5 in your face, without any makeup on, without any enhancements, no Botox, no surgery, just your natural state, and you gave yourself a 5 in your face, that means you're average. If you gave yourself a 7, that means you are above average. Now, recognize you have to adjust from a man's perspective. So generally speaking, my view is deduct about 2, sometimes up to 3, from whatever you give yourself, because most women generally score themselves an 8, 9, or 10. 10 refers to perfection. There's nothing wrong with you. 9 means you're almost perfect. There's very little wrong with you that you can see from an observational perspective. 8 also means that you, if you bear with me for a second, let me, yeah, I have notifications coming up, and I should have turned these notifications off. 8 simply means that you're very close. There isn't that much wrong with you. Give yourself a score. From a weight perspective, here is a formula. Look at your weight in kilograms. Take your weight in kilograms. Let me use numbers that could be easy to remember. The average height of a woman in the United Kingdom, as of today, is 5'3". That number used to be 5'2.5", going back to the 1980s, but it remained roughly between 5'2" and 5'3". It is 5'3" today. 5'3" then becomes the benchmark. Now, the reason this formula works is because it's height adjusted. We're trying to determine what should be your ideal weight, and we adjust it to your height. Your height in kilograms is what you should weigh in kilograms. Sorry, your height, your weight, I'm confusing matters. Look at your height, look at your weight. If you're 5'3", 5'3" becomes what you should weigh in kilograms for your weight. So 5'3", you should weigh 53 kilograms. We then make allowances for additional weight that might relate to either your breasts or adjustments. Now, the taller you are, here is the key metric. If you're 5'5" and below, you should not weigh more than your ideal weight. You should be going down. Someone who is 5'5" can weigh 55 kilograms. If they go up to 5'6", there's an allowance for more, because on a height adjusted basis, they can carry that weight. If they drop from 5'5" to 5'3", they should be going down. So it's the same thing, 5'3", 53 kilograms, but ideally you should be reducing. So you should be looking at 50 kilograms, 49 kilograms, 41 kilograms. In any case, to keep matters simple, take your height. Whatever numbers you get, those numbers represent what you should weigh in kilograms. Now, when you get to 6 foot and above, you can carry more, which means you can allow yourself to go up to about 10% above your height adjusted weight. So someone who is, say, 6 foot as a woman can weigh 60 kilograms plus 10%, which is 66. Ideally, 5 to 10% margin, either way is fine. So, to judge yourself as to where you stand from a weight perspective, if you are 5'3" and you weigh 63 kilograms, what we do is we take 63, we divide by 5'3", which is 53, and that will give you a number. You subtract 1 from that number, and that will tell you how much overweight you are. So let me use see if I can illustrate this in a way that you can understand using a calculator. To illustrate, you're 5'3", you should weigh 53 kilograms. That's your ideal weight. But you weigh 63 kilograms, so 10 kilograms over. 10 kilograms over, if you divide by 53, I don't know if you can see this. Well, I'm not sure you can see anyway. If you divide 63 by 53, you get 1.18. 1.188. It simply means you're 18.8% over your ideal weight. So, which is why I said if you subtract 1, it gives you 0.18. That 0.18, if you multiply by 100, you convert that to percentages. So a very simple way is you weigh 70 kilograms and you're 5 foot. Well, if you're 5 foot, that's 50. You should weigh 50. Effectively, you're 5.0. You should weigh 50 kilograms. 70 divided by 50 would mean 1.4. You subtract 1, it means you're 40% overweight for your adjusted height. Now, let's deal with what that means. If you are your ideal weight, your average, If you weigh below your ideal weight, you're higher than average. If you exceed your ideal weight, you are below average. So for someone who weighs 40% above the ideal weight, you're way below average. Remember, we started with number 1, we've done number 2, we've done number 3, we're now number 4, your weight. The purpose of reminding you of all of this is because you're scoring yourself something, 5, a 5, a 5. Assuming we went through the 10 items and all you scored was a 5, then it would mean that you actually have a 5 of a value from a man's perspective, and therefore your asking price should be about 5 or less, but not too greater than 5. When it's too much, too greater than 5, you have a mismatch and there will be no buyers. People walk away because people are looking for a good deal. This also means if you've scored 5 all the way through, your ideal man, the man you qualify for, is average. So you can't be asking for an investment banker. You can't be asking for a neurosurgeon. You can't be asking for a really, really, really successful man who perhaps is ranked 9 or a 10. There is a mismatch. Now, number 5, and this is where it's key. Were you trained to be a wife? Were you trained to be a wife? There are 2 ideologies that face women in the West, generally speaking, in the West. The traditional or the modern ideology. My position is that roughly about 85 to 90% of women have bought into the modern ideology, the feminist, women's movement ideology. And they do not have any traces of the traditional ideology. They don't understand anything about what it means to be a wife. And most of them were not trained or raised or prepared to be wives. So they do not have any qualifications or skills. They don't have the attitude. They don't have the charisma. They don't have the patience that wives have. And so for men who are looking for wives, they consider most women to be fun girls, play girls, someone you have an exciting time with, but not wives, because you are below average. When it comes to the whole thing about men looking for wives and scoring you on the wife scale, men are not asking for too much. If you were trained to be a wife, in other words, here's a good example. Were you raised and did you witness your mother serving your father on a daily basis? And I'm speaking about having 2 meals prepared fresh, not takeaways, 2 meals prepared daily. I'm talking about the table set, daddy sitting down, mum serving the children as well. Now, as you started to grow into your, let's say, your early becoming a young girl, did mum teach you to serve your brothers and your father? Was there an expectation that I serve my husband, you serve your brother? When guests come, you serve and you set the table for guests and you bring drinks. Were you conditioned and trained and raised to have a servant's spirit? Were you raised and trained on how to speak? The etiquette of a woman, the decorum of a lady. Were you raised and trained on how to be patient? Were you raised and trained on how to meet a man's needs in terms of what men want? Were you raised and trained to be a helpmeet to a man? In other words, to be a support system to a man and his vision. Were you raised to be forgiving? Were you raised in a nurturing way to be a wife? Or did you grow up from your early 18s and 19s thinking, I don't want to be married, I don't want to be a wife? Or did you have this instinctive part of you before 25 where you knew that you always wanted to be married? Wives are trained and prepared to go from their father's houses straight to their husband's home. They don't go from father's house to the city of London or the city of Manchester or the city of Birmingham or whatever city it might be, to their house, buy their own properties, have a great life in their young 20s and 30s, and then hopefully have a man moving to their house or moving with a man. They don't expect that huge void. Women who have, from the age of 18, and I'm going to use a number, 25, 18 to 22 is 5 years. Education. From 23, that's really when you start to become independent as an adult. We'll give you 2 extra years just to get yourself going. But from 25, women who are 25 and above, who spend more than 10 years living on their own, not living under daddy's authority or daddy's roof, but living on their own, were not raised to be wives. Because there's something instinctive about women who were raised to be wives that attract husbands. So number 5 is, were you trained? Were you raised to be a wife? If you were not prepared for, and you did not witness, and you didn't come from a 2-parent family, then you score below average. Now, this does not mean that you can't compensate by learning through other people, but it becomes a much harder task. Some women are average because they were provided with that training de facto. Some women are above average because they witnessed and they desire to be wives. And their mannerism, and I talk about this from a perspective that I use an acronym, NSMV, your non-sexual marketplace value. Your peaceful attitude, your good judgment, your temperament, your servant spirit, your femininity, that's the key word, femininity. And then the list goes on, your attitude. Women who were raised to be wives walk into spaces, and other women acknowledge them as having the temperament of wives. Men recognize and want to protect and provide for them. If you find yourself to be an independent woman, strong independent, if you use those words to define yourself, then you were not raised to be wives. Women who were raised to be wives believe in interdependence, not independence. Now, number 6 is your height. I spoke about your weight, but your height. The average height in the UK is 5'3" for women. If you are 5'3", you are average. If you're 5'3" and above, you are slightly above average. So women who are 5'9" fall into the category of perhaps the top 5% on a height basis. Women who are 5 foot are below average. So 5'3" and below means you're below average from a height perspective. Now, this can be done by country. So you go to Canada, Australia, the United States, Great Britain, Singapore, any country, and you look at what is the average height of women. If you are in height less than the average, then you're below average. If you are average, then you are average. If you're above average, then you are above average. This is not complicated. That is number 6. Now, number 7 is your fitness and your appearance, your physique. We all have different body shapes. I'm going to use the athletic build to illustrate, generally speaking, a standard. Not a standard for all women to aspire to, but something that can be visualized. Structured shoulders, where you can see collarbones. Toned abs. In other words, a 6'4", sometimes an 8-pack, but flat abs. It doesn't have to be muscles, but it has to be flat. You don't have the guts that sticks out. Why? If you haven't had children, you shouldn't have a reason to have a gut from a female's perspective. You should have flat abs. Now, you should have, if you have an athletic build, less prominent hips. Not this monstrosities that we see these days, very tiny waist and enormous hips, enormous bums. That isn't a lady's physique. That is not a lady's physique. Your hips should not be too wide. Your bum should not be too huge. You should have some level of toneness to your thighs, your muscular thighs, or just slender and slim. Your thighs should not have a friction when you walk from a female's perspective. Now, I know certain women have a different build. I'm talking about generally speaking. You should have well-toned calves. This simply indicates that you exercise, you walk, you're disciplined. Now, the athletic build is used as a reference because what it shows, go back to the ABCD of image, is the word discipline. The fact that you care enough for yourself to maintain the one thing that you only have one of, which is your body. It just indicates that you take care of yourself and you're doing as much as you can to ensure that you maintain the one body you will only have for as long as you can. And number 8 is your age. Again, another sensitive conversation. If you're 30 years and under, you're above average from an age perspective. If you're 30 years and 30 years up until 35, you are average. Geriatric pregnancy begins from 36 and above. Generally speaking, the only reason most men generally want to go into marriage is to have children. So men want to make sure that they can actually bring to term their seeds. Not all men, generally speaking. And therefore, your age plays a part in what I refer to as your reproductive fertility value, your RFV. At 18, the quantity of eggs and the quality of eggs is deposited in a woman. It's known, it's fixed. As age takes its toll, you lose some of the quality and the quantity. So, fertility, from a reproduction perspective, women score higher in their reproductive fertility value than when they get older. This is something nature has set. So, should you meet your creator, if he does exist, that is a question you can ask him. I'm not making a judgment, I'm simply saying your obs and gyne will tell you from 36 and above, you are in what we call high-risk pregnancy. From 40 and above, they say, we do not recommend it. It's not safe for you and it's not safe for the baby. The reason being, the gates start to close down from 35 onwards, 35 end and onwards. So, if you're 30 and below, you're above average. 29, 28, 26, 20, 24, 25, 22, you are above average. The younger the woman is, the more desirable she is. Youth, fertility, beauty, chastity, decorum, which is what men primarily wish for and want. So we give much higher credits to younger women. 30 to 35, you are average. 35 and above, you're below average. Now, recognize I'm speaking about the marketplace, and the marketplace comprises of people who are looking for relationships. It doesn't mean if you're 60, you're not attractive. If you're married already and 40 or 50, it doesn't mean you're not attractive. You are attractive and valuable to your husband. That's where your value comes from. But in the marketplace doesn't care much for how you feel. The marketplace doesn't owe you forgiveness, apology, understanding. The marketplace simply is a relative place where people contrast and compare what we call options. If I stood in the marketplace, I'm being compared to a 19-year-old boy in several ways and a 50-year-old man in several ways. I don't judge the market because the market simply knows what it wants. Your age matters. The younger you are, the higher your value. The older you are, the lower your value. Now this brings me to number 9. Kids. Kids. If you have had children, that lowers your value. The more children you have, the more value you lose. So for example, assuming you scored average on every single of the 8 items I've mentioned so far, that would mean on the aggregate, you are average, a 5. If you then throw into the picture that you've already had a child out of wedlock, and that your child is say 12, we remove 1 point. It means you become a 4. If you've had 2 children, we remove 2 points. You become a 3. So the more kids you have, the lower your value, adjusted. The more kids you have, and providing those kids have come from men who are not of the same caliber as the men who are vetting you, the lower your value. The more kids you have, and if those kids have come from something that was not a formal or religious union, the more disadvantaged you are, because men will simply say, and here is a good way of explaining this. Perhaps this might not apply to everyone. Some of you might think about it as fiction, but let me juxtapose. About 66% of the population of the world believe in some religion. If you were to combine the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, they make up roughly 60+%. That is statistically significant. It means the majority fall into 3 religions. Across the 3 religions, there is something that is consistent. What is consistent, and I'm going to speak to 2. If you read the books of the Torah, Judaism, or the Bible, Christianity, whether it be the New Covenant or the Old Covenant, what you find is a woman's value was so high that in several times, what was called the Maker spoke to the woman, or came down in a form to speak to the woman. We know of Samuel and his mother, an angel coming down to say, you will be with child, and your child will be important. You move forward, we know of Elizabeth and John the Baptist. Now we know of people in between, but I'm trying to move between the Torah, or Judaism, and Christianity. We know of John the Baptist and his mother Elizabeth. And we also know of Mary and her son, the Christ. And in each of the instances, a woman is considered so precious that an angel comes down and says, something is about to happen in your womb. So much so that in one instance, Divine was asking for permission to do business with her womb. In other words, I want to bring something special through you. A woman gives a man the highest honor when she chooses to bring to term a child on his behalf. It's the highest honor because she risks her life in the process. It's the highest honor because she reproduces and keeps his lineage and his heritage and his ancestry line going. When women therefore choose to reproduce for men who did not bestow upon them an equivalent honor of marriage, we say to those women, tell me a second. We say those women have failed in recognizing their value, and therefore dishonored their wombs, and therefore for the next man. Remember, we no longer have virgins like we used to. There was a time when men paid a price for a woman's chastity, her youth, her beauty, but she came with a price, the virgin's price. These days, women are not virgins. You've had multiple experiences. Women are gatekeepers to their bodies, their emotions, and their wombs. Men are gatekeepers to marriage. Men pay very strict attention to who we ask, or who we go on one knees, both knees, and no knees, and ask to join us in union. Women are supposed to play such a strong position also because they are gatekeepers to themselves. A woman can give her emotions to a man she loves. She can give her body, but not her virginity. When she gives her virginity to another man, there is no new experience. When she gives it to so many other men and has done everything under the sun sexually, there is no new memory or experience with the new man who wants to pay the highest price of marriage. So she's given all of these experiences to men who didn't pay nothing. Now, if she's stupid enough and silly enough to reproduce for any of those men without demanding that he sacrifice and give her the keys for which he has possession to, which is marriage, then she trivializes her value. So she reproduces and brings to term a child. The man that comes into the picture then says, I don't get to be the first man you fall in love with. No problem. I don't get to be the first man you kiss. No problem. I don't get to be the first man you have sexual intercourse with. I don't even get to be the first 20 men you have sexual intercourse with, none of which paid a price. But also you've then reproduced for another man. Where are the new memories for me? Why should I pay this price when every other man has come and, like a leased car, tried the car, driven it around and returned the car and walked away? Why do I now have to pay full price? So the number of kids you have or the number of children you've had, either in wedlock or out of wedlock, plays a part. Generally speaking, if you have been married and you become widowed or divorced, whilst there are some nuances that help you, it still counts against you, because the man, at the point he's looking to make you a wife, is also auditioning to be a stepfather to your kids. I'm going to say something to young men, and I'm going to say very directly. I do not encourage men, particularly men who are looking to marry women, who have children, and who have female daughters. I do not encourage, if those girls are below 18, the younger they are, the more this strict warning should be heeded. I do not encourage and I do not approve of a relationship with a woman of that caliber for many reasons. In this day and age, in this culture we have, where anybody can say anything, you have no responsibility for the child, you have no benefit, you have all the responsibility financial for the child, but you have no benefits as a father. You're simply a token father. You're there to provide, but you gain nothing from the process. But here's the key thing: the liability is too high. The same girl, these days we've heard of young girls who want to get back at their mothers, partners or husbands, and they say things that are false. All the young girl has to do is say, your husband touched me in the wrong way. And the police will show up, and now you're branded a pedophile. I can understand if the child is a boy because it's much easier, but it comes with its complications. Imagine this boy knowing his father is alive and having to contend with you. There's this animosity that brews in a child. There's a feeling that you are not part of their identity, despite how hard you try. So even if you've been married and divorced, and even widowed, now we are supposed to look after the widows and the orphans, so there is an exception. And we take very kindly and in a gentle, subtle way, widows and orphans. We have to look after them. So we put them in a different category, widows. But when you look at divorced women, in the UK, 7 out of 10 divorces that take place are filed by women. In the remaining third, 3 out of 10 rather, in half of those instances, the women are the ones who ask the man to file. They do so from a social perspective. They want to say, well, he filed for divorce, but they are the ones demanding. They make it live in hell for the husbands, so he files. Therefore, in 8.5 out of 10 cases, women are the ones filing for divorce. This is partly why men do not sympathize with women who have children or who have been divorced. Now I'm going to end with number 10, femininity. Femininity. I have been stunned at how many women I have met over the years. And in my interactions with women and interaction with women who understand my temperament, I have been surprised at how many times I have been told, oh, she's feminine. And I've responded, well, her hardware is feminine, her software is masculine. Femininity is an attitude, it's a disposition, it's a mannerism, it's a behavior, learned or otherwise, it's a culture, it's a subconscious state of being. I think 8 out of 10 women in the West are not feminine. They're female, but they are not feminine. Only about 2%, 2 out of 10, are feminine. It's a diminishing group, feminine women. And this is where I talk about your non-sexual marketplace value. And women have to really understand what it means to be feminine. I'll give you a good example. I use someone that I know, and I use someone that she knew. And when she described the person, I said, she's not feminine. And she said, well, she dresses nice and she likes to party. She's quite inspirational. And I said, but she's not feminine. She has a female hardware, but her software is masculine. She's disagreeable. Men are by nature disagreeable. Women are by nature, feminine women, agreeable. But her disagreeable nature is as though she's always looking for a fight. And I used examples to illustrate. And the lady in question said, yes, you're right. She will look to argue. She will look to debate. She will never back down because she has this installation, which is a masculine installation. Now, she dresses like a woman. She dresses feminine. She speaks feminine until you see the pathology that exists in most modern women, where a conversation begins. Anger is the first indication. She goes from her nature to being angry, even sometimes much more so than most men. She shames you when she doesn't agree with you. Shame, she uses insults, calls you names. Guilt, uses words, references from your past to guilt you into changing your position. And she will always try to be right. N, the need to be right. The pathology of most women. It began from the suffragettes and the movement, and most women were conditioned to remember the sign language. In dealing with men, sign, shame, insult, guilt, and the need to be right. But before that, there will be anger. The suffragettes began this by trying to copy from movements that became known before they started their movement. Most movements were pioneered by men. Two emotions and actions, anger and violence. The suffragettes took anger, they tried to be violent, and they realized, well, you can't be violent against men in a man's world. So very quickly, because they were scared of being branded terrorists or being attacked by men, they kept the anger because they had to express how they felt. But they realized that we can use suffering men in the same manner that men compete with women. We can use tactics. We can shame them. We can insult them. Which is why in the West you see the first thing a woman says is, talks about your manhood, or she goes to the core of your ego. It's the strategy for attacking a man. Feminine women don't have any of that. As a matter of fact, the feminine woman in your presence, if there's a debate, as your voice as a man increases, her voice reduces. Because she's looking for protection. She starts to back down, looking for protection. Masculine women assert, while you, the man, assert. So much so that they even assert at a pitch and a voice higher than yours. 10 items. How a woman can understand her value from a man's perspective, and how she can understand the price she's asking. If your value across the 10 items is a 5 average, and you have a long list of asks, you might find you will get to 35 and be alone, and at 37 you will be alone, and as you approach 40, just like the lady I spoke of yesterday, you will be going to a sperm bank to find someone's sperm to start your family, because you could not coexist with a man and give a man what he wanted and do a deal. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.